What could terrify an entire squadron of elite alien warriors so completely that they would freeze mid-battle, weapons dropping from trembling appendages? What sight could be so fundamentally horrifying that beings who had conquered 1,000 worlds would simply stop fighting and stare in absolute terror? The answer lies not in some terrible weapon or monstrous creature, but in something far more mundane, yet infinitely more terrifying to those who witness it. Watching a human eat their lunch. You see, across the galaxy, humanity has earned a name that sends shivers through the exoskeletons of the most hardened alien veterans, the Starforged. Not because of their weapons, though those are formidable. Not because of their ships, though those are nearly indestructible. But because of what they are willing to consume to survive. What the galaxy doesn't understand is that humans didn't just evolve on a death world. They evolved as the apex predators of a death world so hostile that merely eating became an act of such primal savagery that other species cannot comprehend how any intelligent being could possibly survive the process. This is the story of the day the Zephyrian Empire learned why you never, ever interrupt a Starforged during the asteroid mining facility designated Kepler. 7 drifted silently through the void, its massive industrial arms methodically stripping precious metals from the floating rocks around it. Commander Zara Thorne stood on the observation deck of the human cargo vessel Endurance, watching the operation with practiced eyes. Her weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, the bitter liquid providing warmth against the cold reality of space. "Ma'am," called out Lieutenant Rodriguez from his station. "We're getting some interesting readings on the long-range sensors. Looks like we've got company coming in fast." Zara didn't turn immediately. She had been expecting this. The Zephyrian Empire had been making aggressive moves in this sector for months, claiming exclusive mining rights to asteroids that had been jointly operated by human and alien corporations for decades. Their latest ultimatum had expired 3 days ago, and the Empire wasn't known for making empty threats. "How many ships, Rodriguez?" she asked, taking another sip of her coffee. 15. No, make that 18 vessels. Looks like a full battle squadron. Zephyrian configuration, definitely military grade. They'll be in weapons range in approximately 40 minutes. The other humans on the bridge continued their work with calm efficiency. No one panicked. No one raised their voice. This was exactly what they had prepared for. Zara finally turned from the window, her gray eyes taking in the scene around her. The bridge of the Endurance wasn't particularly impressive by alien standards. The humans preferred function over form, and everything here served a purpose. "Signal the mining platform," she ordered. "Tell them to begin evacuation procedures. Non-essential personnel should head for the escape pods. Essential crew should continue operations until the last possible moment." "Yes, ma'am," Rodriguez replied, his fingers dancing across his console. "And our response to the incoming Zephyrian fleet?" Zara allowed herself a small smile. "We wait, and we have lunch." The lieutenant looked confused for a moment, then shrugged. He had served under Commander Thorne for 3 years, and her unconventional methods had never let them down. If she wanted to have lunch in the face of an incoming alien battle fleet, then lunch they would have. 20 light minutes away, Fleet Admiral Vextai of the Zephyrian Empire stood on the command deck of the massive dreadnought Crimson Talon. His insectoid features were set in what passed for a grim expression among his species, compound eyes reflecting the various displays that surrounded him. The Zephyrians had evolved from a species similar to Earth's praying mantises, growing to an average height of 7 feet, with razor-sharp claws and natural armor plating. They were born warriors, and their empire had expanded through military conquest for over 1,000 years. "Admiral," reported Subcommander Kretha, her voice carrying the clicking undertones that indicated excitement. "The human vessel is maintaining position. They have not fled, nor have they powered weapons. Intelligence reports suggest only a single cargo ship, and perhaps 50 humans total." Vextai's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. 50 humans against 18 warships. Either they are completely insane, or they have something we don't know about. "Sir, with respect, they are only Starforged. Yes, their reputation is substantial, but 50 of them cannot possibly stand against our entire squadron. Perhaps they simply lack the courage to run." The Admiral's laugh was a harsh, grating sound. "Kretha, you are young. You have not faced the Starforged in battle. I have. Let me tell you what I learned. When humans do not run, there is always a reason. And that reason is usually very bad for whoever is about to find out what it is." Despite his words, Vextai felt confident in his overwhelming numerical superiority. The humans had 1 cargo vessel, barely armed, against his squadron of dedicated warships. Each of his ships carried enough firepower to level a city. The math was simple. "Continue approach," he ordered. "But maintain alert status. Watch for anything unusual." Back on the Endurance, the crew was indeed preparing for lunch. The ship's small galley buzzed with activity as the cook, a cheerful man named Pete Morrison, worked over several heating units simultaneously. The aroma of cooking food filled the corridors, and crew members began gathering in the mess hall. Zara entered the galley area and surveyed the spread that Pete had prepared. On the table sat what appeared to be a normal human meal: grilled steaks, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and various sides. To human eyes, it looked delicious. To alien sensibilities, it would appear to be something else entirely. "Pete, this looks excellent as always," Zara said, picking up a plate. "I think our timing is perfect." The cook beamed with pride. "Well, ma'am, when you told me we might have alien visitors, I made sure to prepare some of Earth's finest cuisine. Nothing like a good meal before a potential firefight." Lieutenant Rodriguez approached with his own plate. "Ma'am, the Zephyrians will be in visual range in about 15 minutes. Should we open a communications channel?" "Absolutely," Zara replied, cutting into her steak with obvious relish. "In fact, make sure they get a full visual feed of our mess hall. I want them to see exactly what we're doing." Rodriguez paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "You want them to watch us eat? Trust me on this one, Rodriguez. Just make sure the camera angle gives them a good view of the whole meal." Meanwhile, aboard the Crimson Talon, the communications officer was indeed establishing a visual link with the human vessel. Admiral Vextai intended to offer terms of surrender before beginning his attack. It would save ammunition and reduce the chances of damage to the valuable mining equipment. "Admiral, we have visual contact with the human ship," reported the communications officer. "They are They appear to be in their feeding chamber. Vextai approached the main viewing screen with interest. He had studied human behavior extensively, knowing that understanding an enemy's psychology was crucial for victory. What he saw on the screen initially seemed unremarkable. Humans sitting around tables, consuming what appeared to be processed organic matter. Patch me through, he ordered. Full visual and audio. The screen flickered, and suddenly, Admiral Vextai's imposing form appeared on every monitor aboard the human vessel. His voice, translated through universal communication devices, echoed through the mess hall. Humans of the vessel Endurance, he began formally. I am Fleet Admiral Vextai of the Zephyrian Empire. You are in violation of Imperial space, and are ordered to surrender immediately. Prepare to be boarded, and you will be treated according to the conventions of warfare. Commander Thorne looked up from her meal, chewed thoughtfully, and swallowed before responding. Admiral Vextai, I'm Commander Zara Thorne. We're currently having lunch. Would you like to wait until we're finished, or would you prefer to join us? The casual nature of her response clearly caught the Zephyrian Admiral off guard. His compound eyes focused more intently on the human activities visible through the camera feed. Commander Thorne, you seem to misunderstand your situation. You are outnumbered 18-1. Surrender now, and your crew will be treated with honor. Zara took another bite, this one larger and more deliberate. She made sure to chew thoroughly, her jaw working with obvious strength. Admiral, we appreciate the offer, but we have a policy about not conducting business during meals. It's bad for digestion. As she spoke, the camera angle shifted slightly, giving the Zephyrians a better view of exactly what the humans were consuming. Admiral Vextai found himself staring at the scene with growing fascination and horror. On the screen, he could see humans methodically tearing apart what appeared to be muscle tissue from some large creature. They were using metal implements to slice through the organic matter, exposing the interior structure. Red liquid, which his database identified as blood, leaked from the tissue as they cut. One human, a large man with calloused hands, picked up what appeared to be a complete limb from some animal, and began gnawing directly on it, his teeth easily penetrating what looked like a protective outer layer to reach the softer tissue beneath. By the void, whispered Subcommander Kredha, her voice barely audible. Are they consuming dead flesh? Admiral Vextai's mandibles began clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. He had heard stories about human feeding habits, but seeing it in person was entirely different. The Zephyrians, like most spacefaring species, had evolved beyond such primitive consumption methods millennia ago. They consumed synthesized nutrients in carefully balanced formulations. The idea of actually devouring the flesh of other creatures was so alien, so primitive, so fundamentally savage that it challenged their basic understanding of what it meant to be a civilized being. What are you eating? Admiral Vextai found himself asking, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Commander Thorne looked directly at the camera as she cut another piece of steak. This is cow. Well, part of a cow. Specifically, the muscle tissue from the torso region. We raise them on our agricultural worlds specifically for consumption. This particular cut comes from a bull that probably weighed about 1,200 pounds when it was alive. She held up the piece of meat on her fork, letting the juices drip for a moment before putting it in her mouth. The trick is to cook it just enough to make it safe, but not so much that you lose the natural flavors and textures. This one is cooked rare, which means the interior is still quite red and juicy. Several of the Zephyrian bridge crew made what could only be described as gagging sounds. Their species had highly sensitive stomachs, and the mere thought of consuming actual organic tissue was nauseating. But Commander Thorne wasn't finished. She gestured to the human beside her, who was indeed gnawing on what appeared to be a large bone. Henderson, there is enjoying some ribs. Those are the bone sections that protect the vital organs of the creature. We cook them slowly so that the meat becomes tender enough to pull directly off the bone with our teeth. As if on cue, Henderson looked up at the camera and grinned, his teeth stained with what appeared to be red sauce and meat juices. The bones themselves contain marrow. Thorne continued conversationally, which is quite nutritious. Some of our crew prefer to crack them open and consume the interior directly. Admiral Vextai watched in horrified fascination as another human did exactly that, using a small hammer to break open a large bone and scraping out the gelatinous interior with a small spoon. Commander, he said slowly, are you telling me that your species kills and devours other living creatures for sustenance? Well, not just for sustenance, Thorne replied cheerfully. Also for pleasure. We have thousands of different preparation methods, seasoning combinations, and cooking techniques. It's quite an art form, really. Pete here, she gestured to the cook, who waved enthusiastically, can prepare the same cut of meat in dozens of different ways depending on mood and occasion. She took a sip of what appeared to be a dark liquid. This is coffee, by the way. It's made from grinding up the seeds of a plant, and then forcing very hot water through the powdered remains. The caffeine helps keep us alert during long operations. The Zephyrian crew was beginning to understand that they were witnessing something far outside their cultural experience. In their society, as in most advanced civilizations, the consumption of actual biological matter was considered not just primitive, but actively barbaric. The humans weren't just eating, they were demonstrating a level of biological savagery that suggested they had barely evolved beyond their predatory origins. How? Admiral Vextai found his voice catching slightly. How do you kill these creatures? Commander Thorne's smile became slightly predatory. Oh, there are many methods. Traditional approaches include using projectile weapons to damage vital organs, or blade weapons to sever major blood vessels. Some of our agricultural worlds prefer more industrial approaches, stunning followed by exsanguination. The key is to minimize stress hormones in the meat, which can affect the flavor. She cut another piece, this one bleeding more noticeably. Of course, some of our cuisine involves consuming creatures while they're still alive. Raw preparations are quite popular in certain regions of Earth. At this point, several members of the Zephyrian crew had left their stations, overcome by nausea. Admiral Vextai himself felt his grip on his command chair tightening as his claws extended involuntarily. You consume living tissue? He managed to ask. Oh yes, Thorne replied casually. Some delicacies are best when the creature is killed moments before consumption. Maintains freshness and texture. We have entire industries devoted to keeping food creatures alive right up until the moment of consumption. She gestured to a bowl of what appeared to be green organic matter. These are plants, of course. We consume those as well, though usually they're harvested while still growing. These particular vegetables were probably pulled from the soil this morning and prepared immediately to maintain nutritional value. The revelation that humans consumed not just animals, but also plant life in its natural form was somehow even more disturbing to the Zephyrian mindset. Their synthetic nutrition had long ago eliminated any connection to the actual biological processes of other life forms. Lieutenant Rodriguez, clearly enjoying the effect their meal was having on the alien observers, picked up what appeared to be a large seed and bit into it with a loud crunch. These are almonds, he explained helpfully. Tree seeds. We eat them raw or roasted. Sometimes we grind them up and make paste from them. Admiral Vextai found himself backing away from the viewing screen. The casual way the humans discussed their consumption of other life forms was deeply unsettling. But worse than their words were their actions. He could see that they were genuinely enjoying this process. Their body language suggested pleasure, satisfaction, even joy at the act of consuming biological matter from other creatures. Commander Thorne, he said, his voice strained. Perhaps we should discuss terms of surrender through different channels. Oh, we're not surrendering, Thorne replied, taking another bite. We're just having lunch. But you're welcome to continue this conversation when we're finished. Should be another 20 minutes or so. The transmission remained open, and Admiral Vextai found himself unable to look away despite his revulsion. The humans continued their meal with obvious enjoyment, each bite revealing new horrors. One human peeled the skin off what appeared to be a round fruit, revealing the flesh beneath, then bit into it with obvious pleasure. Another cracked open what looked like a hard shell to reveal some kind of meat inside. But it was Commander Thorne herself who provided the most disturbing demonstration. She had finished her portion of muscle tissue and moved on to what appeared to be internal organs from some creature. As Admiral Vextai watched in mounting horror, she cut into what was obviously a liver, the knife releasing dark blood that pooled on her plate. This is foie gras, she explained, noticing his attention. Liver from a specially fed waterfowl. Quite a delicacy where I come from. She consumed the organ meat with evident relish, licking the blood from her lips when she finished. The bridge of the Crimson Talon had fallen completely silent. Even the normally steady background hum of the ship's systems seemed muted in the face of what they were witnessing. Admiral Vextai realized that his understanding of human capabilities had been fundamentally flawed. A species that could casually consume the organs of other creatures, that treated the systematic killing and devouring of life forms as a pleasurable social activity, was operating on a level of biological ruthlessness that his military training had never prepared him to confront. These weren't just warriors. They were apex predators who had somehow developed advanced technology without losing their fundamental nature as killers and consumers of other life forms. The timer on his tactical display showed 12 minutes until his fleet would be in weapons range of the human vessel. But Admiral Vextai found himself questioning whether that was actually something he wanted to happen. Admiral Vextai forced himself to maintain visual contact with the human feeding display, though every instinct screamed at him to terminate the connection. His military training demanded that he study his enemy, understand their capabilities and psychology. But what he was witnessing challenged fundamental assumptions about civilization itself. Subcommander Kredha, he called without turning from the screen. Have our xenobiologists ever filed reports about human feeding behaviors? Kredha's voice came from behind him, noticeably strained. Sir, there are reports, but they were largely dismissed as propaganda or mistranslation. The consensus among our scientists was that no spacefaring species could possibly engage in such primitive consumption methods. On the screen, Commander Thorne had moved on to what appeared to be fermented plant matter. She cut into a wedge of something white and orange, releasing a pungent aroma that was apparently pleasant to humans, but caused visible distress among the Zephyrian crew when their environmental sensors detected and analyzed it. This is cheese, Thorne explained, seemingly unaware of the effect she was having. It's made by allowing certain bacteria to consume and transform the mammary secretions of large herbivores. The aging process can take months or even years, during which the bacterial colonies continue to break down the proteins and fats. She took a large bite of the bacterial mass, chewing with obvious pleasure. This particular variety is made from the milk of creatures called goats. The bacteria give it a distinctly sharp flavor that pairs well with the wine. Admiral Vextai's compound eyes focused on the dark liquid she was drinking. Wine. Fermented fruit juice, came the cheerful reply. We crush the fruits and allow wild yeast to consume the sugars, converting them to alcohol. This bottle is about 30 years old, which means the fermentation and aging process has been ongoing for longer than most Zephyrian military careers. The Admiral found himself calculating the implications. Humans not only consumed biological matter from other creatures, but they allowed bacterial contamination to proceed for decades before consuming the result. They were essentially eating controlled decay. The alcohol serves multiple purposes, Thorne continued, apparently enjoying her role as cultural ambassador. It acts as a social lubricant, reducing inhibitions and promoting bonding behaviors. It also has a mild antiseptic effect and can serve as emergency medical supplies. But, mostly, we drink it because the taste pleases us and the effects are relaxing. Lieutenant Rodriguez raised his own glass of the dark liquid. This particular wine was produced on our colony world of New Bordeaux. The vines were originally transplanted from Earth, but they've adapted to the local soil conditions. The result has some unique characteristics that you can't get anywhere else. He took a long drink, and Admiral Vextai noticed that the human's behavior was becoming slightly more animated and relaxed as they consumed the fermented plant matter. Sir, whispered Communications Officer Ralte, are they voluntarily consuming mind-altering substances before a potential combat situation? The Admiral didn't answer immediately. He was beginning to realize that human psychology was far more complex and dangerous than any previous intelligence reports had suggested. A species that would consume intoxicating substances while facing an overwhelming military force was either completely insane or operating from a position of such confidence that they felt no threat whatsoever. On the human vessel, the meal was progressing through multiple courses. Pete the cook emerged from the galley carrying what appeared to be a large container of some brown substance. Dessert, he announced cheerfully, beginning to distribute portions to the crew. Commander Thorne accepted a bowl of the brown material and held it up toward the camera. This is chocolate cake. Chocolate is derived from the seeds of a tropical plant. We grind the seeds, combine them with various other ingredients including the unfertilized reproductive cells of flying creatures, refined plant sugars, and processed grain powders, then apply heat to create this final product. She took a large spoonful of the substance, which appeared to be soft and dark. The cake also contains dairy products, those bacterial processed mammary secretions I mentioned earlier, and is topped with a cream made from more dairy products combined with refined sugars. Admiral Vextai watched in fascination as the humans consumed what amounted to a concentrated mixture of processed biological matter from multiple different species. The casual way they described combining reproductive cells, bacterial colonies, and refined organic compounds suggested a level of biological manipulation that bordered on alchemy. Commander, he found himself asking, do your people consume any synthesized nutrients? Oh, we have emergency rations and supplements for long voyages, Thorne replied between bites. But they're generally considered pretty unpalatable. Nothing beats fresh, natural ingredients properly prepared. She gestured around the mess hall. Most of our cuisine is based on combinations of biological matter from our homeworld. We've been developing and refining these preparation techniques for thousands of years. It's one of our oldest and most important cultural traditions. The Admiral's tactical officer, Commander Zektar, approached his station with obvious reluctance. Sir, we are now within weapons range of the human vessel. Do you wish to commence attack? Admiral Vextai hesitated. Standard military doctrine called for immediate assault once within optimal firing range. But something about the human's behavior was triggering deep survival instincts that had served his species well throughout their evolutionary history. Commander Thorne, he said, addressing the screen directly. Your vessel is now within range of our weapons. This is your final opportunity to surrender. Thorne looked up from her dessert, a small amount of the brown substance still visible on her lips. Admiral, we told you we were having lunch. It's considered extremely rude in human culture to interrupt someone during a meal. Her tone remained conversational, but Admiral Vextai noticed that every human in the mess hall had become completely still. They weren't reaching for weapons or diving for cover. They were simply sitting quietly, watching the camera with expressions of polite attention. You would risk your lives for a social convention? He asked. Oh, it's more than just politeness, Thorne replied. You see, Admiral, there's something you should understand about human feeding behaviors. We don't just eat for nutrition. We eat to remind ourselves what we are. She cut another piece of the chocolate cake, this time more deliberately. Every meal is a reminder that we are apex predators, that we have conquered our environment so completely that we can afford to take time to properly prepare and consume the flesh of creatures we have defeated. The casual brutality of her words sent a chill through the Zephyrian Bridge crew. This wasn't just alien behavior. It was a fundamental difference in how humans viewed their relationship with the universe around them. When we sit down to eat, Thorne continued, we are celebrating our victories over every other life form on our planet. We are demonstrating our mastery over biological processes. We are proving to ourselves and anyone watching that we are the ultimate survivors. She took another bite of cake. So when someone interrupts that process, what they're really doing is challenging our fundamental nature as predators and survivors. Admiral Vextai felt his carapace beginning to darken, an involuntary response to extreme stress among his species. Are you threatening us, Commander? Not at all. Thorne replied with a smile that revealed teeth clearly designed for tearing flesh. I'm just explaining why it's considered rude to interrupt someone's meal. It's like challenging them to prove they deserve to be at the top of the food chain. She gestured to her crew, who remained motionless and alert. Of course, if someone were to actually issue such a challenge, well, humans have never been known to back down from proving their predatory superiority. The tactical implications of her words were becoming clear to Admiral Vextai. The humans weren't just eating. They were using their feeding behavior as a form of psychological warfare, demonstrating their nature as biological predators, while simultaneously indicating their complete lack of concern about the military threat facing them. Lieutenant Rodriguez finished his wine and set the glass down with a soft clink. Admiral, if I may ask, what do your people eat? The question caught Vextai off guard. We consume synthesized nutritional compounds, carefully balanced formulations of essential elements and energy sources. Rodriguez nodded understandingly. So you've eliminated the need to kill other creatures for survival. That must be very peaceful. There was something in his tone that made the word peaceful sound less like a compliment and more like an accusation of weakness. Commander Thorne stood up, wiping her hands on a cloth napkin. Well, Admiral, we've finished our meal. Thank you for your patience. Now what was this about surrender? The casual transition from discussing their predatory nature to addressing military matters sent another wave of unease through the Zephyrian Bridge. These humans seemed completely unconcerned about the overwhelming odds they faced. Commander, you are outnumbered 18-1, Admiral Vextai stated formally. Your single vessel cannot possibly stand against my entire battle squadron. Surrender now, and you will be treated with honor according to the conventions of warfare. Thorne exchanged glances with her crew, and Admiral Vextai noticed that several of them were smiling. Not the nervous smiles of people trying to maintain courage in the face of impossible odds, but the genuine expressions of people who were about to enjoy themselves. Admiral, Thorne said, walking closer to the camera so her face filled more of the screen. You seem to be operating under some fundamental misunderstandings about human capabilities. Her eyes, Admiral Vextai noticed, were the pale gray color of winter storms, and they held an intensity that made him unconsciously step back from his own viewing screen. First, she continued, you assume that our ship is unarmed simply because your sensors don't detect conventional weapon systems. This is an error based on your limited understanding of human engineering principles. She turned to address someone off camera. Mr. Henderson, would you mind activating the external lighting array? I think our guests would benefit from getting a better look at our vessel. The lighting around the human ships suddenly intensified, and Admiral Vextai's tactical officer immediately began recalibrating their sensors to accommodate the new illumination levels. "Sir," Commander Zektar called out, his voice tight with concern. "I'm detecting massive structural modifications to the human vessel. The entire outer hull appears to be reinforced beyond any civilian specifications." "Second," Thorne continued, "you assume that 18 ships constitute overwhelming odds. This suggests you've never actually fought humans before, Admiral. If you had, you would understand that numbers are far less important than determination and tactical flexibility." The lighting array continued to intensify, and Admiral Vextai began to make out details of the human vessel that had been hidden in the shadows. What he saw challenged his understanding of civilian spacecraft design. "Third, and most importantly," Thorne said, her smile becoming predatory, "you assumed that we called for backup simply because we were having lunch. This is perhaps your most dangerous misconception." As if summoned by her words, new contacts began appearing on the Zephyrian long-range sensors. Ships dropping out of hyperspace in positions that would cut off any retreat route for the alien fleet. "You see, Admiral," Commander Thorne explained as alarm klaxons began sounding on Zephyrian vessels throughout the squadron. "In human culture, when someone rudely interrupts your meal, it's traditional to invite more friends to join you for the next course." The sensor readings were now showing 37 human vessels surrounding the Zephyrian fleet, each one significantly larger and more heavily armed than anything in Admiral Vextai's squadron. "Allow me to introduce the third human deep space fleet," Thorne said pleasantly. "They were already in the system conducting training exercises when you decided to crash our lunch party. Fortunately for all of us, they were just finishing their own meal and were available to join our little gathering." Admiral Vextai stared at the tactical display showing his fleet completely surrounded by superior human forces. His mind struggled to process how the situation had reversed so completely in such a short period of time. "The choice is now yours, Admiral," Commander Thorne continued. "You can surrender honorably, and we'll treat you according to human conventions of warfare. Or you can choose to fight, and we'll demonstrate why interrupting a predator's meal is generally considered a fatal mistake." Her words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Admiral Vextai realized that he had made perhaps the greatest tactical error of his career. He had mistaken human confidence for ignorance, their casual behavior for weakness, their willingness to eat in the face of danger for stupidity. Now he was learning the truth that every other species in the galaxy had discovered the hard way. When humans seemed unconcerned about overwhelming odds, it usually meant the odds weren't actually what they appeared to be. The silence on the bridge of the Crimson Talon stretched for nearly a full minute as Admiral Vextai processed the tactical reality that had materialized around his fleet. 37 human warships, each reading as significantly more powerful than his own vessels, had somehow positioned themselves in a perfect encirclement without triggering any of his early warning systems. "Sir," whispered Subcommander Kretha, "how did they mask their approach so completely? Our sensors should have detected them long before they achieved tactical positioning." Admiral Vextai's compound eyes remained fixed on the main display, where Commander Thorne waited patiently for his response. Behind her, he could see the human crew beginning to clear away the remnants of their meal, moving with the same casual efficiency they had displayed throughout the entire encounter. "Commander," Communications Officer Ralte called softly, "we're receiving identification transponders from the human vessels. They're broadcasting as the third human deep space fleet, Battlegroup Constellation. The flagship is identified as the Prometheus, a Terra-class dreadnought." The Admiral's mandibles clicked involuntarily. He had heard of Terra-class vessels, massive ships that served as humanity's primary instruments of deep space warfare. Intelligence reports suggested they were the size of small space stations, bristling with weapons systems that human engineers had somehow managed to miniaturize beyond all theoretical limits. "Admiral," Commander Thorne's voice drew his attention back to the screen. "I can see you're taking some time to evaluate your tactical situation. That's wise. But I should mention that human military doctrine includes something called escalation protocols. The longer a potential enemy takes to decide on surrender, the less favorable the terms become." She gestured to someone off camera, and a new figure appeared on the screen. This was clearly a military officer of higher rank, judging by the more elaborate uniform and the bearing that spoke of absolute command authority. "Admiral Vextai," the newcomer said, "I am Fleet Admiral Sarah Chun, commanding officer of the 3rd Deep Space Fleet. Commander Thorne has filled me in on your interruption of her crew's meal. I thought it might be helpful if I explained the current situation from a strategic perspective." Admiral Chun moved to stand beside Commander Thorne, and Admiral Vextai noticed immediately that her presence seemed to make the already confident Thorne appear almost relaxed by comparison. This was a woman who commanded the respect of people who were already apex predators. "Your intelligence services," Admiral Chen continued, "appear to have provided you with incomplete information about human capabilities. This is understandable, as we generally prefer to let other species make their own assumptions about our military strength. It reduces unnecessary conflicts." She activated what appeared to be a holographic display, showing the current tactical situation from an overview perspective. Admiral Vextai's 18 ships appeared as small red dots completely surrounded by much larger blue symbols representing human vessels. "Your fleet represents approximately 43% of the Zephyrian Empire's total military strength," Admiral Chun stated matter-of-factly. "My battle group represents roughly 12% of human deep space capability, and we happen to be in this sector conducting routine training exercises." The implications of those numbers sent a chill through Admiral Vextai's exoskeleton. If the humans were accurate in their assessment, then the Zephyrian Empire had catastrophically underestimated human military capacity. "However," Admiral Chun continued, "I'm not particularly interested in discussing military statistics. What concerns me more is the cultural transgression your forces have committed here today." She turned slightly to look at Commander Thorne, who nodded respectfully. "You see, Admiral Vextai, you interrupted a human crew during their meal. In our culture, this is considered not just rude, but actively hostile. It suggests a fundamental lack of respect for human customs and, by extension, human sovereignty." Admiral Vextai found his voice. "Fleet Admiral Chun, We were unaware of the significance of this feeding behavior. Our intention was simply to deliver terms for territorial negotiation. Admiral Chen smiled, and her expression somehow managed to be both understanding and terrifying. The problem, Admiral, is that ignorance of human customs is not considered an acceptable excuse. You see, any species advanced enough to achieve interstellar travel is presumed to be capable of basic diplomatic research. She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed detailed files on Zephyrian culture and military organization. For example, we know that Zephyrian warriors undergo a ritual cleansing period before major battles, during which interruption is considered a grave insult worthy of blood challenge. We know that Zephyrian reproductive ceremonies require 3 days of uninterrupted meditation, and that disturbing these ceremonies can result in permanent psychological damage to the participants. Admiral Vextai stared at the comprehensive data displayed on the human systems. The level of detail suggested intelligence-gathering capabilities that went far beyond anything the Zephyrian Empire had achieved. We study our neighbors, Admiral Chen explained. We learn their customs, their taboos, their cultural sensitivities. We do this because we believe that true strength comes from understanding, not from ignorance backed by superior firepower. She paused, letting her words sink in. The fact that your empire sent a military force to interrupt human feeding behaviors without first understanding the cultural implications suggests either profound incompetence in your intelligence services or deliberate disrespect for human sovereignty. Commander Thorne stepped forward again. Admiral Chun, with your permission, I'd like to offer Admiral Vextai an educational opportunity. The fleet admiral nodded. Proceed, Commander. Thorne turned to address the Zephyrian admiral directly. Admiral, I'm going to explain something that might help you understand why your current situation is far more dangerous than you realize. She walked to what appeared to be a viewing port, gesturing for the camera to follow. Through the transparent material, Admiral Vextai could see the vast bulk of one of the human dreadnoughts, its hull covered in weapon systems and sensor arrays that defied easy categorization. That ship, Thorne said, pointing to the massive vessel, is the Prometheus. It's carrying a crew of approximately 8,000 humans. Right now, every single one of those crew members knows that a foreign military force interrupted their comrades during a meal. She turned back to face the camera. In human psychology, Admiral, there are very few things that unite us as completely as a shared sense of cultural violation. You haven't just threatened one crew of 50 humans. You've insulted the cultural practices of our entire species. Admiral Vextai's tactical officer was monitoring communications channels between the human vessels, and his reports were becoming increasingly alarming. Sir, I'm detecting massive amounts of intership communication. The humans appear to be coordinating something on a fleet-wide level. What you're detecting, Commander Thorne explained, apparently monitoring the same communications, is 37 ship crews sharing their reactions to your cultural transgression. They're discussing appropriate responses, comparing this incident to similar historical events, and generally working themselves into what humans call righteous anger. She smiled again, and Admiral Vextai was beginning to understand that human smiles could communicate a wide range of emotions, many of them predatory. Righteous anger, Admiral, is one of the most dangerous psychological states a human can achieve. It combines our natural predatory instincts with moral certainty. The combination tends to produce remarkably creative and thorough responses to perceived threats. Fleet Admiral Chen's voice drew attention back to the strategic situation. Admiral Vextai, you now have approximately 15 minutes to make a decision that will determine the future relationship between your empire and humanity. The holographic display shifted to show a wider view of the local star system. My scouts are reporting Zephyrian reinforcement fleets moving toward this position. Apparently your empire views this as a test of strength. This is unfortunate. New symbols began appearing on the display, more human vessels dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Fortunately for diplomatic purposes, human reinforcements are also arriving. The difference is that our reinforcements include the 1st and 5th Deep Space Fleets, along with elements of the Home Guard Expeditionary Force. Admiral Vextai's tactical officer was now openly staring at his sensor readings. Sir, I'm counting this can't be right. I'm reading over 200 human vessels in system or approaching. 237, to be precise, Admiral Chen confirmed. The human military operates on the principle of overwhelming response to cultural transgressions. When someone insults our customs, we ensure that they understand both the depth of the insult and our capacity to respond to it. The scale of the human response was beginning to sink in. Admiral Vextai realized that what had started as a routine territorial dispute had somehow escalated into a confrontation between his 18 ships and what appeared to be a significant portion of the human Deep Space Navy. However, Admiral Chen continued, I am authorized to offer you an alternative to what is shaping up to be a very one-sided military engagement. Commander Thorne stepped forward again. The alternative, Admiral, involves education rather than destruction. You see, humans believe that most conflicts arise from misunderstanding rather than genuine malice. A new image appeared on the display, what looked like a massive space station. This is Cultural Exchange Station Harmony. It's a joint human-alien facility where representatives from different species can learn about each other's customs, traditions, and social structures. Your 18 ships, Admiral Chen explained, could surrender formally and accept assignment to a 6-month cultural exchange program. Your crews would learn about human customs, while human observers would study Zephyrian military traditions. At the end of the program, your vessels would be returned to Zephyrian space with full diplomatic honors. The offer was generous beyond anything Admiral Vextai had expected. Rather than facing destruction or imprisonment, his crews were being offered education and eventual freedom. The alternative, Admiral Chen said quietly, is to continue this military confrontation. In that case, I am authorized to demonstrate why interrupting human meal times is considered a species-level threat requiring maximum response. As if to underscore her point, the sensor readings from Admiral Vextai's ships began registering weapon systems activating throughout the human fleet. The energy signatures were unlike anything in Zephyrian military databases, weapons that apparently operated on principles his engineers had never encountered. Admiral, Subcommander Kretha whispered urgently. our defensive systems cannot even identify the type of weapons the humans are targeting us with. We have no countermeasures for unknown technology. But it was Commander Thorne who provided the most compelling argument for surrender. Admiral Vextai, let me ask you something. After watching my crew eat lunch, do you really want to find out what humans do to people who threaten our survival? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Admiral Vextai found himself remembering the casual way the humans had discussed consuming the organs of other creatures, their obvious pleasure in the systematic killing and devouring of biological matter. A species that could take such evident joy in the consumption of flesh, that could casually discuss the best methods for killing and preparing other life forms, that could treat the systematic destruction of biological matter as a pleasurable social activity. Such a species would approach warfare with the same predatory enthusiasm they brought to their meals. Admiral Chun, he said finally, I formally request information about the cultural exchange program. 6 weeks later, Admiral Vextai stood in the observation gallery of Cultural Exchange Station Harmony, watching human children play in the station's recreational areas. The sight that greeted him would have been incomprehensible to him before his recent cultural education, but now served as a perfect example of the fundamental differences between human and Zephyrian psychology. The human younglings were engaged in what their supervisors called games, but what Admiral Vextai now understood were actually elaborate training exercises designed to hone their natural predatory instincts. A group of children was playing something called tag, which involved hunting each other through a complex environment while trying to avoid capture. Another group was engaged in hide and seek, a sophisticated exercise in concealment and detection that would have challenged seasoned Zephyrian scouts. But it was the third group that truly demonstrated the alien's nature of human development. These children, none older than 10 standard years, were playing what they called war. They had divided into teams and were attempting to eliminate each other using projectile weapons that fired harmless light beams, while employing tactical maneuvers that showed an intuitive understanding of battlefield strategy. Fascinating, isn't it? Came a voice from behind him. Admiral Vextai turned to see Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the human xenopsychologist who had been assigned as his cultural liaison. Over the past 6 weeks, she had proven to be both patient and thorough in her explanations of human behavior. Dr. Rodriguez, he replied, his universal translator rendering his clicking speech into smooth human language. I am observing the juvenile training exercises. The level of strategic thinking displayed by your young is remarkable. Dr. Rodriguez smiled, joining him at the observation window. We prefer to call it play, Admiral. For humans, the development of tactical thinking, physical coordination, and social cooperation happens naturally through activities that the children find enjoyable. This is what concerns me, Admiral Vextai admitted. Your species appears to have evolved in such a way that warfare and violence are sources of pleasure rather than necessary evils. The doctor nodded thoughtfully. That's a common misunderstanding among other species. Humans don't enjoy violence for its own sake. We enjoy the challenge of overcoming obstacles, the satisfaction of protecting our communities, and the bonds formed through shared effort. Violence is simply one tool among many that we use to achieve these goals. She gestured toward the playing children. What you're seeing here isn't training for aggression. It's training for survival, cooperation, and problem solving. The fact that some of these skills can be applied to warfare is secondary to their primary purpose. Admiral Vextai considered this explanation while watching a young human successfully outmaneuver 3 opponents through a combination of speed, cunning, and careful timing. The child's victory celebration, jumping, and calling out in triumph, was clearly a source of genuine joy. Dr. Rodriguez, may I ask you about human feeding behaviors? I have been observing meal times for several weeks now, and I believe I am beginning to understand the cultural significance, but some aspects remain disturbing to Zephyrian sensibilities. Of course, Admiral. What specifically would you like to understand? Yesterday, I observed a group of human adults preparing what you call the barbecue. They spent several hours cooking various types of animal tissue over an open flame, and they appeared to derive great satisfaction from the process itself, not just the consumption. Dr. Rodriguez's expression brightened. Ah yes, barbecuing is one of our more social cooking methods. What did you think of it? The humans seemed to enter an almost meditative state while tending the cooking fire. They discussed the optimal temperature, the proper timing, the ideal combination of seasonings. It was clear that they were not simply preparing nutrition, but engaging in a complex cultural ritual. That's an excellent observation, Admiral. Human cooking is indeed ritual behavior, but it's not about death or domination as many alien species assume. It's about transformation, community, and the celebration of abundance. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. You see, for humans, the act of preparing food represents our mastery over our environment. But, more importantly, it represents our ability to create something greater than the sum of its parts. We take raw materials and transform them into something that brings pleasure, nourishes our bodies, and strengthens our social bonds. Admiral Vextai nodded slowly. I begin to understand. The consumption of biological matter is not primarily about demonstrating predatory dominance, but about affirming your species' role as what you might call creative destructors. That's actually quite insightful. Dr. Rodriguez replied with obvious approval. Humans are indeed creative destructors. We break down complex systems and rebuild them in new forms that serve our purposes. This applies to everything from cooking to engineering to social organization. And this is why interrupting a meal is considered such a serious transgression. Exactly. When you interrupt a human meal, you're not just disrupting nutrition intake. You're interrupting a fundamental expression of human nature, our ability to transform our environment to serve our needs, while simultaneously strengthening our social connections. Admiral Vextai spent a moment processing this information. Over the past 6 weeks, his understanding of human psychology had undergone a complete transformation. Where once he had seen primitive savagery, he now recognized sophisticated cultural practices that served multiple functions simultaneously. Dr. Rodriguez, I have been developing a theory about human military effectiveness. Would you be willing to evaluate it? I'd be happy to hear your thoughts. I believe that human success in warfare stems not from superior technology or numbers, but from your species' unique ability to apply creative destruction principles to military strategy. Where other species view conflict as a competition between static forces, humans treat it as an opportunity to transform the battlefield itself to their advantage. Dr. Rodriguez's eyebrows raised slightly. That's actually quite accurate. Human military doctrine does emphasize adaptability and environmental manipulation over brute force applications. Furthermore, Admiral Vextai continued, warming to his subject, human tactics appear to be based on the same psychological principles that govern your feeding behaviors. You prefer to create situations where your enemies are off balance and unable to respond effectively, much as you prefer to consume food that has been transformed from its original state to something that serves your purposes. Admiral, you're developing a remarkably sophisticated understanding of human psychology. What led you to these conclusions? Observation and experience, Dr. Rodriguez. For example, 3 weeks ago, I was invited to participate in what you called a poker game with several other exchange officers. I initially assumed it was simply a form of entertainment, but I now realize it was actually a lesson in human strategic thinking. The doctor smiled. How so? The game was not actually about the cards or the mathematical probabilities involved. It was about reading opponents, managing uncertainty, and making strategic decisions with incomplete information. Every human participant was simultaneously playing multiple games: the official card game, a psychological assessment of their opponents, and a social bonding exercise with their peers. Admiral Vextai's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Most importantly, the humans were clearly enjoying the deception, misdirection, and strategic manipulation involved. They took pleasure in outthinking their opponents and adapted their strategies in real time based on new information. And you found this disturbing? Initially, yes. But now I understand that these same skills are what make humans such formidable allies and dangerous enemies. You are a species that treats problem-solving as entertainment and finds genuine joy in overcoming challenges. Dr. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. That's probably the most accurate assessment of human nature I've heard from a non-human observer. We do indeed find satisfaction in solving problems, and we tend to treat most challenges as puzzles to be solved rather than obstacles to be endured. Which brings me to my most important question, Dr. Rodriguez. Why did Fleet Admiral Chen offer us this cultural exchange program rather than simply destroying our fleet? From a strategic perspective, eliminating a potential threat would have been more efficient. The doctor was quiet for a moment, watching the human children continue their games. Admiral, what do you think is humanity's greatest strength? Based on my observations, I would say your adaptability and willingness to find creative solutions to complex problems. Close, but not quite complete. Our greatest strength is our ability to turn enemies into allies. Humans have learned that it's far more effective to transform a threat into an asset than to simply eliminate it. She turned to face him directly. Your fleet represented a potential problem, yes. But 18 ships, and their crews also represented potential resources. Experienced military officers, different perspectives on tactical problems, and, most importantly, a bridge to improved relations with the Zephyrian Empire. So our surrender was not seen as a defeat, but as an opportunity for mutual benefit? Exactly. Humans prefer solutions that create long-term advantages rather than short-term victories. Destroying your fleet would have solved one small problem, but created larger diplomatic issues. Converting your officers into cultural ambassadors solves the immediate problem while creating opportunities for future cooperation. Admiral Vextai considered this explanation while observing the human children, who had now reorganized themselves into mixed teams that included young aliens from several different species. The ease with which they adapted their games to accommodate different physiologies and cultural backgrounds demonstrated the same flexibility Dr. Rodriguez was describing. Dr. Rodriguez, I believe I am beginning to understand why other species find humans so unsettling. It is not your predatory nature that disturbs them. Many species are predators. It is your ability to transform any situation to your advantage while making the transformation appear beneficial to all parties involved. Some species do find our approach to problem-solving disconcerting, she admitted. We tend to change the rules of any game we're playing until we're playing a game we can win. And you do this so naturally that you often don't realize how threatening it appears to species that prefer more traditional approaches to conflict resolution. That's probably a fair assessment. Humans often have to consciously remind ourselves that other species may view our flexibility as unpredictability and our willingness to change strategies as evidence of deception. Admiral Vextai watched a young human child successfully convince a group of alien children to try a game none of them had played before, transforming potential cultural confusion into an opportunity for shared entertainment. Dr. Rodriguez, I have one final question. When this cultural exchange program ends, what will be expected of me and my officers? You'll be returning to Zephyrian space as cultural ambassadors and military advisors. Your mission will be to help your empire understand human psychology and capabilities, while also serving as communication links for future diplomatic interactions. And if the Zephyrian Empire chooses to view this as evidence of human manipulation rather than genuine diplomatic outreach. Dr. Rodriguez's smile became slightly predatory, and Admiral Vextai realized that he was seeing the same expression Commander Thorne had worn during that first encounter. Admiral, in 6 weeks of cultural exchange, you've learned to understand human psychology quite well. What do you think would happen if your empire declared war on humanity? Admiral Vextai considered the question, drawing on everything he had learned about human nature, strategy, and capabilities. I believe the war would be over before the Zephyrian Empire fully understood what was happening. And, when it ended, every surviving Zephyrian would be enrolled in cultural exchange programs until they learned to appreciate human customs. Now you're thinking like a human, Admiral. 1 year after the incident at Kepler 7, Admiral Vextai stood before the Zephyrian Imperial Council in the Grand Chamber on their homeworld of Kythera. The circular amphitheater was filled with the Empire's highest-ranking officials, military commanders, and noble houses. The clicking and chittering of hundreds of conversations created a constant background noise that was suddenly silenced when High Chancellor Mordeth raised his ceremonial staff. Admiral Vextai, the Chancellor's voice resonated through the chamber's acoustics. You have returned from your educational exchange with the humans. The Council is eager to hear your assessment of their military capabilities and strategic intentions. Admiral Vextai had spent weeks preparing for this moment, knowing that his words would shape the Empire's future relationship with humanity. Around the chamber, he could see the expectant faces of officials who had sent him out expecting confirmation of human weakness, and had instead received reports of unprecedented military strength and cultural sophistication. Honored Chancellor, esteemed Council members, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's natural amplification. I must begin my report with a fundamental correction to our previous intelligence assessments. A murmur of interest rippled through the assembled officials. The humans are not the primitive predators we believe them to be. They are apex predators who have successfully hidden the full extent of their capabilities behind a facade of casual behavior and cultural eccentricity. General Caxrin, the Empire's supreme military commander, clicked his mandibles sharply. Admiral, your preliminary reports suggested human military technology far exceeds our own capabilities. Surely this is an exaggeration based on limited observation. Admiral Vextai activated the holographic display system, showing detailed technical specifications that he had been permitted to document during his exchange program. General, these are confirmed specifications for standard human military vessels. As you can see, their smallest destroyers carry more firepower than our heavy cruisers, while their dreadnoughts operate weapon systems that our engineers cannot even theoretically duplicate. The technical data caused visible agitation throughout the chamber. Several council members began urgent conversations with their military advisors, while others demanded clarification of specific capabilities. However, Admiral Vextai continued, their technological superiority is not the primary threat they represent. The true danger lies in their psychological and cultural characteristics. High Chancellor Mordeth leaned forward in his elevated seat. Explain this assessment, Admiral. Honored Chancellor, humans treat conflict as a form of entertainment. They approach warfare with the same creative enthusiasm they bring to their feeding behaviors. They do not simply seek to defeat enemies. They seek to transform entire strategic situations to their advantage. Admiral Vextai gestured to the holographic display, which now showed tactical analyses of historical human conflicts. In every documented engagement, humans have demonstrated the ability to adapt their strategies in real time, often turning apparent disadvantages into decisive advantages through means their enemies could not anticipate. You speak of their feeding behaviors, interjected Councillor Veltar, the Empire's chief xenobiologist. Your reports describe practices that seem to defy basic civilization standards. Surely these are exaggerations or misunderstandings. Counselor, I was privileged to participate in numerous human feeding rituals during my exchange period. I can confirm that humans not only consume the flesh of other creatures, but they have developed thousands of preparation methods that they consider art forms. Admiral Vextai paused, remembering his own initial revulsion and subsequent understanding. What I initially perceived as primitive savagery is actually a sophisticated cultural practice that serves multiple psychological and social functions. Humans use their feeding behaviors to reinforce social bonds, demonstrate cultural mastery, and maintain psychological readiness for conflict. The chamber fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. A species that could maintain predatory instincts while developing advanced technology and complex social structures represented a type of threat the Zephyrian Empire had never encountered. Admiral, High Chancellor Mordeth said carefully, what are your recommendations for future interaction with human forces? Honored Chancellor, I recommend immediate implementation of comprehensive diplomatic protocols designed to avoid cultural transgressions that might trigger human defensive responses. Admiral Vextai activated new images showing cultural exchange station harmony and the joint human-alien facilities he had observed. The humans have demonstrated remarkable willingness to share technology and knowledge with species that approach them with appropriate respect for their customs. However, they respond to perceived cultural insults with overwhelming military force applied with surgical precision. General Caxrin's carapace was beginning to darken with stress. Admiral, are you suggesting that our empire should subordinate itself to human cultural preferences? General, I am suggesting that our empire should recognize reality. Human military capabilities are so far beyond our own that conventional conflict would result in the complete destruction of our forces with minimal human casualties. However, humans prefer diplomatic solutions that create mutual benefits rather than zero-sum victories. Admiral Vextai brought up recordings from his cultural exchange program, showing Zephyrian officers working alongside human crews on joint technical projects. During my exchange period, human engineers shared manufacturing techniques that have increased the efficiency of our ship systems by 37%. Human tactical instructors provided training that has improved our officers' strategic thinking capabilities measurably. And what did humans gain from these exchanges? Asked Councillor Daltek, the Empire's chief trade negotiator. Cultural understanding, alternative perspectives on engineering problems, and, most importantly, the transformation of potential enemies into valuable allies. Admiral Vextai turned to address the entire council directly. Honored members, humans do not seek to conquer other species through military domination. They seek to create networks of mutual cooperation that serve their long-term strategic interests. They would prefer to have the Zephyrian Empire as a willing partner rather than a conquered territory. The chamber erupted in discussion as council members debated the implications of his assessment. Some argued for immediate military preparation, while others advocated for diplomatic outreach. The clicking and chittering of competing conversations created a cacophony that lasted for several minutes before High Chancellor Mordeth called for order. Admiral Vextai, the Chancellor said, you have provided the Council with much to consider. However, I must ask, do you believe humans represent a long-term threat to Zephyrian sovereignty? Admiral Vextai had anticipated this question and had prepared his response carefully. Honored Chancellor, humans represent a threat only to species that insist on viewing interstellar relations as zero-sum competitions. For species willing to engage in mutually beneficial cooperation, humans represent unprecedented opportunities for technological advancement and cultural enrichment. He gestured to his own officers, who had accompanied him back to Zephyrian space. My crew and I have experienced human hospitality, learned from human technical expertise, and observed human military capabilities firsthand. We returned to the Empire not as defeated prisoners, but as ambassadors equipped with knowledge that could benefit our entire civilization. General Caxrin stood up, his impressive height dominating the chamber. Admiral, you speak of cooperation and mutual benefit. But what happens when human interests conflict with Zephyrian interests? What happens when their expansion threatens our territory or their resource requirements compete with our economic needs? General, that is precisely the wrong question to ask. The statement caused a shocked silence throughout the chamber. It was unprecedented for an admiral to so directly contradict the supreme military commander. The correct question, Admiral Vextai continued, is how can Zephyrian interests be aligned with human interests in ways that create advantages for both species? Humans are masters of transforming competitive situations into cooperative opportunities. They would rather expand the total resources available to both species than fight over limited existing resources. He activated a final holographic display showing human terraforming projects and resource development initiatives. Humans do not simply take what they need from existing systems. They create new systems, develop new resources, and build new opportunities. They would prefer to help us expand our own capabilities rather than compete with us for what currently exists. High Chancellor Mordeth studied the displays thoughtfully. Admiral, you are suggesting a fundamental shift in how our empire approaches interstellar relations. Such changes require careful consideration and extensive planning. Honored Chancellor, with the greatest respect, we do not have the luxury of extensive planning. Human expansion into this sector is proceeding rapidly, and other species are already establishing cooperative relationships with them. The longer we delay diplomatic engagement, the less favorable the terms of eventual cooperation will become. Admiral Vextai turned to address the entire council one final time. Honored members, I have seen what happens to species that attempt to intimidate humans through military posturing. I have also seen what happens to species that approach humans with respect and genuine interest in cooperation. The choice before us is simple. We can be partners in human expansion, or we can be obstacles to be overcome. And if we choose partnership, asked Counselor Veltar, then our empire gains access to technologies that could advance our civilization by centuries, strategic knowledge that could secure our position in this sector for generations, and, most importantly, allies who consider the destruction of their partners to be personally offensive. The chamber fell quiet as council members processed the weight of his words. Admiral Vextai could see the calculations taking place behind their compound eyes as they weighed the risks of cooperation against the consequences of opposition. Admiral, High Chancellor Mordeth said finally, you will remain available to this council for detailed consultation as we develop our response to the human presence in this sector. Your expertise will be invaluable in crafting appropriate diplomatic protocols. Of course, Honored Chancellor. However, I should mention that Fleet Admiral Chun has extended an invitation for a formal Zephyrian diplomatic mission to visit human space. The invitation includes full cultural orientation and technical exchange opportunities. And, you recommend acceptance of this invitation? Admiral Vextai looked around the chamber at the assembled leadership of his empire, thinking of everything he had learned about human nature and capabilities during his exchange program. Honored Chancellor, I recommend that we accept the invitation immediately, send our best diplomats and technical specialists, and prepare our empire for the most beneficial partnership in our species' history. He paused, remembering Commander Thorne's smile and the casual confidence of humans who could eat lunch in the face of overwhelming odds. Because the alternative is discovering firsthand why every other species in the galaxy has learned to never interrupt a human meal. The final vote of the Zephyrian Imperial Council was unanimous. The Empire would pursue full diplomatic cooperation with humanity, beginning with immediate acceptance of Fleet Admiral Chin's invitation for cultural and technical exchange. 6 months later, Zephyrian and human engineers would complete the first joint research station. 1 year later, combined Zephyrian human exploration fleets would begin mapping previously unexplored sectors. 5 years later, the Zephyrian Empire would become humanity's strongest military ally and most productive research partner. And, throughout the galaxy, other species would learn the most important lesson about dealing with humans. Never, ever interrupt their meal.